Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom to those who are watching us online. And we give the glory to the Almighty God for giving us the opportunity to be able to come to this Shabbat this morning and to be able to glorify His name for what He has done in our life. And we thank Him for making us able to finish the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. We're having double parashot this morning. We thank Him for His grace and for His love and for the opportunity to behold this beautiful day in the land of the living. The parasha or the parashot of this morning are known as Matot and Masai. It's a double parasha this morning, and I subtitled them The Power of the Word. The subtitle is The Power of the Word. This week double parasha begins with the laws of vows, whereby a person designates something. For example, a particular food that is otherwise permitted as prohibited to him or to her by a vow. Effectively, that food or other object takes on the status of haked, something sanctified to the temple vis-a-vis the vow taker, and becomes prohibited to him. The parasha of this morning starts with the laws of the vows, as the Torah states that if a man make a vow to prohibit himself or to bring a vow upon himself, right, that man should fulfill everything that comes out of his lips. Everything that comes out of your mouth you shall stand and do. You shall not go. You shall not reduce from what has come out of your mouth. And also, but there is some nuances when it comes to a female. He said that if a woman vow in her father's house, and her father did not know, but in the days that her father knows, and if her father keeps silent, that the vow should stand. But if her father on the day of him knowing rebuked her and said no, that vow will not stand, and God will forgive her for that. And it goes down to a married woman, that if her husband did not know, or in the day that her husband know and the husband keeps silent, that vow will stand. But if her husband on the day of him knowing rebuke her, the vow will not stand. Whatsoever she said will not stand, and God will forgive her. And the Torah went down again, said, if a divorcee or a widow shall vow, that but say everything that widow or that divorcee said shall stand. But he said there is another but. If that widow become or that divorcee or widow remarried, right, that and their husband keep silent, that whatever they do or whatever they vow shall stand. Then he said again, but if their husband on the day of them knowing rebuke them, that vow will not stand. And he continued, but if the husband hear and he keeps silent, and he did not say anything, and later on he wanted to come and rebuke her for that vow, the Torah said the sin will be upon him. Not upon her, but upon him. Because in the first day he kept silent, he did not say anything. But later now he wanted to come and rebuke her and said, no, that will not stand. But God said, in that case, if the man behaved like that, the sin will be upon him. So let's go down a little bit to see why taking a vow or why making something a provision for yourself. Why are such vows effective? Rabbi Abraham Zvi Kluger explained, based on the writing of Rabbi Shna Zalman, from the fact that products of inanimate plants an animal kingdom can sustain a human being, we can conclude that their root in heaven is loftier than that of a man. Only because we live in an upside-down world did those lofty lights fall to the lower level of creation. Why would someone take a vow not to eat a particular food? Typically, because he felt that his desire for that food is pulling him down, making him feel materialistic and not spiritual. On the other hand, when he prohibits that food through a vow, making it like Hekdesh, likewise, or sanctify, likewise, when a person sanctifies something as a korban or as a sacrificial offering, he is in effect uncovering that thing hidden sanctity. That is why one of the verbs that the Torah use in connection with vow is Yafli. Yafli relates to Pele, which is wonder. That is something whose essence is hidden. I'll give us an explanation here. Our rabbi says that the fact that an inanimate object or any animal or anything from the animal kingdom, that is, or plant, right, can sustain us. How do we live? How do we live? It's a question. We eat, right? And the food goes down into our belly and digests, right? And the nutrients are taken by the cell to sustain the entire body, right? So the plant that you eat and the animal that you kill and eat, they practically sustain you. They give their life for you. Those animals that you kill, don't think it is easy for them to die to sustain you. The plant that you go and cut, they have pain too, but they give their life for you, for your own life, to sustain you, so that you may live, so that you may grow, so that you may not die, so that you may not hungry unto death. So therefore, our rabbi states that in heaven, the root of this the root of these plants, or these animals are loftier because they sacrifice themselves for you to sustain you. Understand that? It's a sacrifice. They give up, even though not willingly, because you didn't ask them, right? So they give their own life to sustain your own life. It's a form of a sacrifice. It's a form of, okay, I give up myself to sustain this man's life, because our teachers or our rabbis say that because we live in an upside down world, so therefore it seems as if we are more advanced or understandable than them. Now, it now says that why should someone take a vow not to eat a particular food or not to drink a particular drink? Why that? Because that man or that woman feel within himself or within herself that by taking that food or by drinking that wine or by doing a particular thing, I'm just giving an example here, okay? That by doing that particular thing that he is doing is drawing him closer into the world. It's making him to feel more materialistic, not spiritually. Is that that particular thing that he is abstaining away from, or that he is putting as a prohibition upon himself or upon herself, is making him or her, right, to become more worldly. Let's say, for example, a woman said, okay, I don't want to put on gold in my ears or in my nose, because when I put it on, I look like, like a worldly woman. Now I want to make a vow Because in my heart, in her heart, that is what she's thinking. Okay, I'm giving an example here too. In her heart, she thinks that by her putting a gold in her nose or in her ears or on her neck, make her to look worldly, and that, or make her to look materialistic. So she decided to make a vow upon herself that I don't want to put on gold anywhere in my body, because that draws me away from God. Because gold is like I draw myself close too much onto gold, and it becomes like my God. So I don't want to use them at all. She made that vow, right? The Torah said it will stand, right? If her husband here, and the husband, let's say her husband is a man that always give her as a gift a lot of gold on her birthday, on a special occasion, give her, and the husband here, and the husband did not say anything, that vow will stand. But if the husband here and said, no, I love you, my wife, and I always give you gold every time as a present, why don't you use it? I want you to use it. The vow that she made will not stand, because the husband wants her to be using those gold. He doesn't want to buy the gold and put it in a safe. He wants to see the gold on the body of his wife. He wants to see how beautiful his wife is. So that is what he's saying. If you prohibit yourself from a particular food or from a particular thing, you feel that thing is making you to lose track with your spiritual track. You feel within yourself that thing is making you not to concentrate in the things of God. So you make that vow not to wear or not to use or not to drink or not to eat that particular thing, because you want to be spiritually inclined with your Creator. So it said that in that case, such a vow, for a man, it will always stand. But for a woman, depending on the circumstances. So, but this week I want to deal more on the parasha Matos. So we're going to go very deep in this parasha. This week parasha Matos and Masai conclude the Sefer Bamidbar. There are numerous episodes here which reveal to us the power of the words. The first parasha Matos begins with the law of the Nadarim, which is the law of oath, which I just said now, and came out. Oath. All that came out from your mouth you must do. That is Bamidbar chapter 30, verse 3. Now, those who live by the sword, the cliche expression goes, die by it as well. I repeat myself. Those who live by the sword, the cliche expression goes, die by it as well. That is, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Right? That is what the Torah said. Now, what about those who live by other means of evil? That's the question I want to ask us now. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Now, what about those who live by other means of evil? What happens to those who live by, for example, by curse? They curse people. Do they die by curse too? Or do they die by sword as well? Okay? He who live by the sword, die by the sword. He who live by the gun, die by the gun. So, those who live by cursing people, do they die by cursing too, or they die by another means? That's my question now. Parasha Matos tells us of the fate of Balaam or Bilam, Bebor, the world's most trusted and experienced sorcerer, whose curses never fail to hit their mark. Balaam was hired by the king of Moab to curse Israel, and only through the merciful intervention of the Almighty, divine hands were his efforts thwarted. After his original scheme had failed, Balaam devised a plot that found the chink in her spiritual armor. He advised Balak to seduce the children of Israel to sin with the Midianite women. Israel, unfortunately, fell prey to his plot, and the wrath of Adonai was unleashed against his people. Thousands of Israelites were killed in a plague, and if not by the brave intervention of Pinhas, the grandson of Aaron, the toll would have been even more higher. But now it was time for what? For payback. Moshe amassed an army led by Pinhas, which struck Midian hard. The Torah tells us they amassed against Midian as Adonai has commanded Moshe, and they killed every male. They killed the king of Midian along with their slain ones. They killed Evi, Rechem, Zor, Hor, and Rabba, the 5 kings of Midian, and Balaam, son of Beor, whom they slew with the edge of the sword. Remember last week, Parasha, when Balaam could not curse Israel. I want to refresh our mind that Balaam was a sorcerer. Balaam is the nemesis of Moses. Balaam is anti-Moses. Balaam is in negative form, I will say, so to say, of Moses, because our studies states that they are both on the same level spiritually. Okay? Now, since he tried all his best to curse Israel because he was looking for what? For money. Remember, last week, Parasha is what? Is prophet for profit. These are prophets that prophesy only for profit. They need money. Whatever they only tell you what you want to hear. They never tell you, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. They never tell you, make a teshuvah, come back unto your creator. They only tell you, hallelujah, hallelujah, blessed prosperity. That's what they tell you. Because that is the only thing that you want to hear. And you come and dig out all your gold and your money and give it unto them. And they shout and they smile. They go to bank smiling. While you are there, say, oh, hallelujah, this prophet is a man of God. No, it's a prophet for profit. This is the same man who is what? Balaam. It's a prophet. He who paid the highest bid get whatever he wants. That is it. If you pay $200 million, he prophesies for you. If you pay $10, he say no. You are nobody. That is his own schemes. All right. Now he tried all his best to curse Israel, and God said no, that won't happen because I am not angry against Israel. Now he devised Balak a plan. He said, you cannot destroy them. They cannot be destroyed. But I know a means by which you can kill them. I know a means by which you can destroy them. I said, okay, what is the mean? He said, the means is by sin. Because their God hates sin. Their God does what? Their God hates sin. So therefore, you will make them to lust after the Midianites. Arrange the beautiful women. Gather them together and let them shine their bodies and dress up, paint, put all kinds of jewelries and lure them through the women. And the plan worked. Because we are human beings, the men, our eyes shine. Everywhere. We have these wanton eyes everywhere. When we have our own women, no, our women are not good. These Midianites are good. Oh, wow. Wonderful, beautiful. Sin is what? It looks good, but it's dead. Just the same thing that like Eva saw the fruit. Oh, the fruit is beautiful, but actually inside it is a poison. It's dead. There's nothing good about it. He said, not everything that shines is gold. When you see a woman that you think, oh, I will die because of this woman, and your mama and your papa tells you, this woman, she's not good for you. The boy said, no, Papa, you are old man. Papa, you don't understand. Papa, you are old. You are of the old school, right? Papa, you don't know. This is the 21st century. I can do whatever I want to do. This is the woman for me. If you don't allow me to marry this woman, I don't want to talk to you again. You are no longer my father. And at the end, he start crying, coming back home. Papa, you are right. Mama, you are right. But it's too late. Because when you have been warned, you don't listen, because our eyes is wanton eyes. So this brought plague upon the people, because the Midianite women allowed the people to sin. They went specially for the top levels, the leaders. They captured all their heart and their mind. They lured them to go and worship their gods. And God became angry with Israel and began to slaughter them. The plague came only by His grace, through what? Through Pinhas, the grandson of Aaron the Kohen, that came and stopped the plague by killing Zimri and Cosby, who are committing sexual immorality before the whole entire eyes of Israel. Saying, whatever I do, you can do too. There's no problem, because that is what they are telling them. If you are the leader, you do whatever you want to do, you are telling the subject or the people, follow me. Sin is good. Sin is wonderful. Do whatever you want to do. It's a free world. That is what they've been telling us in the 21st century. Especially those big media houses. Sin is wonderful. Destroy. Consume. Don't worry. It is good. But the Torah said, we shall not be among them. It's wrong. It looks good. It looks wonderful. It looks beautiful. But the end is dead. So we saw that Pinhas came and rescued us, and now it is the time to pay back. He said, what? It's a payback time. He said, we are going to see what happened to these people. The Torah said, and Moses amassed the soldiers against them, and he slaughtered all of them, all the male. And the commanders of the army, they took all the women and the children and the young children and the young ladies, and they brought them unto Moses. And Moses was upset. Why did you bring them? Don't you know that these are the people that caused you to die? These are the people that caused you to commit sin. These are the people that God, because of their plan, God begin to slaughter you, and you are bringing them unto me to do what? Moses said, all the women, kill them all. Only leave those women that have not known men. Those women that have not known men, you can take unto yourself. But all the women, because the people are thinking, okay, no, we're going to kill all the men, and brought all the women. But he said, no. That is not what God said. Slaughter the women. All of them. Because those are the women that were used against you to destroy you. But the girls who have not known men, leave them. You can take them to yourself. The small girls, you leave them. The boys, the small boys, slaughter them all. That is the commandment of God, and that is God's justice. Who are you to condemn? But in this world of today, we are going to say, oh, that is wickedness, right? We are going to come and say, okay, we are more righteous than God. We are going to say that, oh, that is inhumane. And that is why our world is upside down. That is why evil begins to spread, and there's nobody to stand against it. When a murderer is murdered, right? You say, oh, why do you murder a murderer? Why do you kill a murderer? But he murdered somebody. And you say, no. We are more righteous than God. Let's take him and put him in prison. Okay? And your taxpayers' money is being used to feed him. And he will even come and tell you, I need TV. Even some of them, the government, they will even sue the government. They say the government is torturing them because they put them in a cell, and the government will do what? Will pay them millions of dollars back. Because we have such example here in Canada, where a terrorist was paid millions of dollars because they said they tortured him. He was a terrorist. So you can see how our civilization has made us foolish, because we think that we are humane. We think that, oh, God is wicked and we are humane, so let us do what let us do away with the word of God, and let us do our own thing. And that is why sin spread everywhere. Father killing their own children because of divorce. They say, oh, this woman will not take these children, I will slaughter all the children. And then they will come and say, oh, it is a stress, I was under stress. What does that have to do with the life of children? These are your own children. Because you don't want the children to go to the woman, you slaughter them all. And they come and they say, oh, no, let us release him and give him his license back to practice his medical stuff. So it shows you how upside down our brain is now. The final few words of the pasuk of the verse raise a question. Does it really make a difference how they kill Balaam? They kill him. Does it make a difference if they kill him by drowning or they kill him by arrow? Perhaps Israel gave him a taste of his own medicine and cast a spell upon him like he attempted to do to the children of Israel. Is it really significant to tell how Israel killed Balaam? Why does the Torah tell us how he died? Torah said that the kings, the 5 kings, were slaughtered. They were killed, right? But Torah takes the time to explain how Balaam died. He said, and Balaam was killed by the edge of the sword. Why that? Why can't the Torah just say, oh, Balaam was killed, and that is it? Or they kill him together with the entire people. That is it. Simple. He died. Does it really matter how he died? But he died. That is it. But Torah want to give us an insight why this is so. Torah want to explain why this is actually so. That he has to taste his own medicine. That we have to give him the taste of his own medicine that has been given to the people of the world. He has to do what? He has to taste it and see if it's good or not. Rabbi Hatkel asks, why, if their victory was guaranteed by their being sent by Adonai, was tefillah necessary? Why was it necessary to have 1,000 prayer warriors, an equal amount of the fighters? Why was it necessary for them to go out to the battle where the fighting was going to take place as well? I'm asking 2 questions here. Because in a midrash in the Talmud, he said that Moses asked for each tribe to produce 1,000 soldiers, and there were total of them 12,000 that went war against the Midianites. And he said there were another 1,000 each from each tribe, another 12,000 of prayer warriors that followed them, praying after them, praying for them for the victory in the battle. Is that necessary? That what is my question now? When God has already commanded them, go and fight, I'm going to give you victory. Why again the prayer warriors? Why again these people need a prayer warriors to pray for them for victory in the battle? He explained that we are misled by that which we see or do not see. If the battle had been won without the prayer warriors being present, even with the fighters being tremendous Sadiqim, there would have been an erroneous feeling of their own power has won the battle. In order for them to clearly realize that the tefillah was the only factor contributing to their victory, they need to see the tefillah taking place. The equal amount of prayer warriors was winning the battle. The voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. Bereshit chapter 27 verse 22. Our battle are won with our mouth, our tefillah, our connection to Adonai. Only in that way can any battle be won. I am saying here now that we can be misled by our own sin for what we see. I can say, oh, you know what? I think I can do this. I think I should go that. You can be misled for what you see or for what you don't see in your mind. But the prayer warriors help in winning the battle. I cannot overemphasize the importance of prayers, my people. I cannot overemphasize the importance of prayer in your daily life, in our daily life. Prayers is the key. Prayer is the key. You have to always be deeply involved in prayers. You have to always commit your activities, everything that you do has to be committed in the hands of the Holy One. Blessed be He. You can, okay, you know what? God said I should go. Now I will just continue to go. Yes, God has commanded you. You should go. But you still have to commit it in prayers, in communication with Him, talking together with Him. Because you might feel that you know what? This battle, I win it by my power. Because I have 12,000 and all the men are strong men. All the men are men of power, are men of valor, are men of authority, are valiant men. So therefore, we win the battle. No. It is not because of your power. It's not because of your might. But it's because of His grace. That is what our sages are trying to tell us. Because we will come back now filled with pride, right? Filled with ego. And say, you see, we destroyed all the Midianites, all their 5 kings, we wiped them out. It is because we are mighty and we are strong, thereby taking all the glory upon ourselves. And remember that the Holy One, blessed be He, does not share glory. He does not share power. All power, glory, and honor belongs to Him alone. So therefore, we should do like what we had in the book of Jacob, in the Messianic writing, that we should do what? We should be humble. We should humble ourselves. Humbleness is the key. You can't just come up and stand and say, okay, it's because I'm smart. It's because I'm educated. That is why I have this position. It's because because I went to university and I got PhD. Yeah, they might have contributed onto your success, but that is not the main. That is not the main. It is just your education is the source to the main, right? It is not because you have PhD and that is why you are so successful. No. It's because God has given you that grace. It's because God has given you life. It's because God has said you are going to attain onto that level. What if you have all the degree in the world, Doctor of Science, and on that day that you got your degree, that is the day God took your life? All your education will be in vain. Right? So it is by His grace, it is God that gives you that grace to attain that greatness. So all glory and honor only belongs to Him, to Him alone. In the account of the battle, the Torah states that Balaam was killed with a sword. Rashi explained that Balaam had tried to use our weaponry. He tried to verbally cause us harm through his curses. It was therefore fitting that his death would come about through our use of his weaponry. The Torah therefore stressed that he was killed by the sword. Remember, as I said, it is said that the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands is the hands of Esau. Do you remember that? That was what Jacob, our father, said. Isaac, our father said. Isaac said, "This is the voice of Jacob, but this is the hand. But the hand is the hand of Esau." What does that mean? You remember, Isaac said that Esau will live by the sword. Esau will live by the sword, while Jacob will live by his word. prayer is the key. The word is very important. You see, Balaam is a descendant of Esau. Balaam understands the weaponry of Israel perfectly well. And the weaponry of Israel is his word, the word that comes out of his mouth. That prayer, that closeness, that relationship with the Almighty. Not religion. Not religion. You might have the old religion in the world. Your religion will not save you. Because I've never heard where they say someone is saved by his religion. Never. And it will never be. But you are saved by the relationship. By the intimate relationship with your Creator. By the intimate relationship that you have with your Creator, that is what saves you. Nothing more. So here I'm talking about that you have to have a very close relationship with who? With your Creator. And how do you build that relationship? Is through the word of your mouth. Through prayer. Through tefillah. Through coming in close relationship with Him that created you. So Balaam understood this perfectly well, that Israel can only be destroyed by what? By the weaponry that Israel always used, which is by his word, by his prayers. So he said, then he came to do what he wanted to cause us by what? By his word. But God said no. So how did he die? He died by sword. You see, as God is doing it, he died by the sword. Our struggle against the nations and our internal struggle to be properly fulfilling our role here in this world is versus the sword. We are placing our trust in our hands, our own ability and strength, or are we cognizant of the fact that all of our successes and our ultimate redemption is solely based on the will of the Holy One, blessed be He, predicted in a relationship with Him? We have to decide, do you think that all the things that you have is by your own power? Do you think that everything that you've been blessed with is because you are smart? Or is by His grace? Our struggle with the nation, our fighting with the nation, is about us retaining our word, the power of the word. It is not because we are the strongest people. The Torah said that the Holy One, blessed be He, has taken us or has chosen us. It's not because we are the most tallest people in the world, or the most fattest, or the most skin, or whatever you want to say, you want to call it, or because we have blue eyes or grey eyes. No, it's not because we are the most smartest. No, it's because we are the smallest. It's because we are the despised. It's because we are nobody. That is why God has taken us and choose us and bring us unto Himself, so that He can make us somebody. Because if He has taken the strongest man, or if He has taken the smartest man will say, it's because I am smart, that's why God chose me. But God said, no, it's not because you are smart that I choose you, but because you are nobody, so that I want to make you somebody. So that the eyes of the world will see that by me, there's nothing impossible. That by God, all things are possible. That through Him, all the mountains can become a valley. All the pits can be uplifted up. Nobody can become somebody. That is what God is saying. It's also, don't come and attribute everything unto yourself and say, because I have this degree or this knowledge, that is why I am successful. No. The potency of our words is illustrated by a Gemara in Kedushin 29. That should be done. What should be done in a situation where there are limited funds available, only allowing either the father or the son to pursue full-time Torah study. The first opinion states that the father take a precedence. He should go and learn, But Rabbi Yehuda argued and state the opinion that if the son is eager, successful, and retain that which he learned, he takes priority over the father. It just explanation from the Talmud. It's whereby there's an argument saying if that we are giving a kind of hypothesis here, say that in a place where there is a limited fund, and we want to send somebody into a Torah school, who take a president, the father or the son? Some people say, oh, it is the father. Why Rabbi Yehuda say no, it is the son. If the son is eager, if the son can retain everything that is studied from the Torah school, then we should give it to the son. You know, remembering that sometimes because as a man, as an old man, your mind is occupied. But as a young man, your mind is still fresh. So your mind can retain a lot of things. You know, you can go to school and and become agile. You are strong. You can move everywhere. You can do a lot of evangelism and so on and so forth. But as an old man like this, it is quite hard. Because his mind is full on about his children, his wife, how are they going to eat, how are they going to do all those sort of things, how to provide for them. But the Gemara then relates an incident that happened, giving us a lot of explanation of what happened. I'm not going to go through that now because it's quite long. I'll just give us the summary. They choose the son to take the place of the father, and the son went, but he came back. He couldn't stand the stress in the yeshiva, in the Torah school. So his father now went in his place, and his father is a man of prayer. His father is a man of power. A prayer. When whatever he pray, it happens. Whatever he say, it happens. So when the rabbi of that school heard that the father is coming, he was so rejoiceful, he was so happy. He said, yes, at the end, that rabbi is coming. Because the director of that school knows his father, that his father is a man of prayer. And there is a demon in the school. This demon has been disturbing the whole student. But the director of the school, of the yeshiva, could not send away or could not kill this demon. But when he heard that the father is coming, he was so happy. He knew that yes, this is his time for him to use that man to kill the demon. So he sent a word to the entire village saying, please don't rent him a house to stay, because the director of the school wants that rabbi to come and live in the yeshiva, in the school. So when the man came, he went through all the houses. Everything was busy. There was no vacancy. So he has no choice than to come to the yeshiva and live there. So when he came there to come and live, he faced the demon. So the rabbi begins to pray. He pray, and he killed the demon in the process. So now the question now is, what the rabbi, the director of the school, what he did, is it right or is it wrong? That's the question. What the director of the school did, is it right or is it wrong? Because in one sense, we can say it is wrong, because in one sense, he's putting the life of that rabbi in danger by making him alone to face that demon. What if the demon overpower him? Then that rabbi will have died, right? Then in another case, if he didn't do that, the demon will be tormenting the student and destroy the yeshiva. So you have to balance it up. The director has to balance. So he's in a situation now that he has to balance up. What can he do? But he knows for sure that rabbi is the man of prayers, the man of powerful word, that whatsoever he said will happen. And that was exactly what happened. So in this case, we have to understand what we are doing. Balaam get the taste of his own medicine. He thought that he can use his word to curse Israel. No. You can try whatever you want to try. You can do whatever you want to do, but as a child of God, no one can overpower you. Your enemy can try all their best, but it will never happen. It will never happen because God is with you. But and for God to be with us intimately, we have to continue in tefillah. We have to continue in prayers. We have to be very close to Him. We have to understand that it is not by our power, but by His grace. Rashi explained the Torah underline aim is telling us how Balaam was killed. Balaam was a descendant of Esau, whose existence of Metiah, which or his mission, were decreed century before by his father Yitzhak. You know, the Metiah of Esau has been declared by our father Isaac long time, that Esau shall live by the sword, while Jacob will live by his word. Remember, the voice is Jacob, but the hand is Esau. Jacob's weapon of choice throughout history came from Isaac's words. The voice is the voice of Jacob. It is through Jacob's mouth, through prayer and petition, persuading and cajoling, can he that he was most successful. Balaam did not use his trademark weapon, the sword, against Israel. He used the word, because he knows that the choice of the weapon of Israel is what? Is his word. Instead, he attempted to cast a spell upon the Israelites. Balaam switched venue and used the mouth, the instrument of brother Jacob. And so, explained Rashi, as Balaam exchanged his Metiah for the Metiah of Israel, or his mission with the mission of Israel, Adonai showed the world that we do not have to rely solely upon our own weapons of choice. As Balaam exchanged his weapon, we too exchange ours. Okay? Balaam exchanged his weapon of choice, because Balaam is a descendant of Esau, and the weapon of choice of Esau is what? Is a sword. But Balaam exchanged it with what? With the weapon of choice of Jacob, which is what? To cause Israel, to cast a spell upon Israel. So now, in his death, we have to change our own weapon of choice. We don't want to cast a spell on him. No. The weapon of choice now is sword. We will exchange it and we will use sword upon him. That is why the Torah speaks clearly that it was killed by the sword. He said, in our times, the success of our people, the success of Israel is by being flexible. Your success, my success, should be that we must always be flexible. We shouldn't be rigid, because if we are rigid, we are going to break. We have to be flexible. We have to be able to maneuver ourselves. You know, in the world, there's a lot of hurdles, and we have to be able to be flexible to maneuver ourselves against all those hurdles. And that is our trick of survivability. And that is how we can be. That is how we can survive in this present world where good is evil and where evil is good. So we have to have this understanding. We have to be able to maneuver ourselves in the path of justice, in the right path. When it comes to dealing with our enemies, I want us to understand this very, very well, please. You have to understand, you have to listen very well. When it comes to dealing with our enemies, we have to use every appropriate means that fit the need of the hours. Despite the fact that we are the people of words, we must know how to put our thought aside and use a different tools. We must know how to put our thought aside and use different tools. When it comes to a situation where we have to deal with our enemies, we have to use all the weapons in our armory. Not only by the weapon of choice, by war. No. All the weapons that we have in our armory must be used against any enemy that want to stand against us. The second parasha we read this week, parasha Masai, recount the 42 travel points we made through the desert on our way to the land of Israel. Only through the travels of the wilderness did we reach the necessary level to enter the land of Israel. This needs to serve as a reminder to us when we face the inevitable travel of our own personal life. Every instant of resistance allows us to build ourselves in a way that otherwise would not have been possible. So we can see all the trials that Israel faced in the wilderness. We can see all the up and downs that we face in the wilderness. This is to remind us that in our own personal life, in our present way of life, that all those hurdles that we may face or that we may find is a way to build us to enter into the land of promise. Nothing come free. Nothing come free. The Holy One, blessed be He, never promised you that everything is going to be hunky-dory. Anyone that come and preach to you that God tell you that everything will be hunky-dory is a false message. And it's lying and it's deceiving you because he want to tell you what you want to hear. The Holy One, blessed be He, never promised you everything is going to be hunky-dory. But what He promised you is you are going to be victorious. For sure, you will be victorious if you come close unto Him. If you attach yourself close unto Him. Because the world that we live is full of all kinds of hurdles, all kinds of temptations, all kinds of trials. But with God on our side, with us attaching ourselves unto Him, we will be victorious. There is nothing, it's not free. Yeshua Mashiach himself, then he said, I never promised you everything free. No. He said, come unto me, all you that are heavy laden. I will take your heavy load and I'll give you a lighter one that you can carry. He never said, I'm going to take your load free of charge and you are free to do whatever you want to do, because that is not the message of the Torah. I will give you a lighter one that you can carry. You still have to have a load, but it's a lighter one that you can carry. God will never give us a load that we cannot carry. He will only give us a lighter one that we can carry. So therefore, we have to stand firm in our faith, in our path to justice, to truth. Never dilute the truth. Stand for the truth. The world does not want to hear the truth. Yeah, it is tough. The world does hate the truth to the core. But we, as the Son of God, as children of the Most High, we must stand firm for the truth and for the truth alone. May we realize, may we utilize the myriad opportunity that we all encounter through our life, particularly using our unique power of speech to connect to our Creator and to properly connect to one another. So the power that we have is the power of what? Of speech. The word. The Torah said the word was created by the word. God said, let there be this, and it comes. Let there be this, and it comes. Let there be this, and it comes. So the most important thing for you, for me, for us as a community is the word. Our intimacy, our closeness to our Creator, to our God, to our King. Can we all stand up? As we said, because as we are handing the book of Bar Mitzvah, traditionally, we always say a word after the ending of every Sifar. So we're going to say, Hazak, Hazak, B'nai Hazak. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. Shabbat Shalom.